The forest of Virex did not welcome light. It swallowed it. Sunbeams touched the treetops, hesitated, and vanished into the canopy like they were afraid to fall any further. Even the wind moved carefully here, rustling only when it thought no one was listening. Varela crouched on a high branch, silent as the moss that clung to her boots. She had been tracking the creature for over 3 days. Not a beast, not exactly, but no one could agree on what he was either. Some called him a remnant, a ghost from the human war, left behind after the treaties were signed and the bodies were counted. Others whispered he was something new, a hybrid, a survivor shaped by solitude and sharpened by time. But none of them had seen what she saw now. Below her, crouched in a sunken clearing layered with leaves and silence, he moved like an animal but killed like a surgeon. The target was a razor beast, one of the older forest apex predators, its claws longer than a grown woman's arm, eyes black and hungry. It had been stalking him for hours, and he let it. Varela watched as he stepped into the shallow gully without a weapon in hand. No gun, no blade, nothing but a stick the size of his forearm and a stone strapped to his hip. The beast lunged. He didn't flinch. He sidestepped low, not fast but precise. The stick cracked against the creature's jaw once, twice. On the third strike, it broke. He dropped it and rolled, picked up a shard of root, thrust upward, right under the jaw. The beast dropped like its strings had been cut. He stood over the body, chest rising with controlled breath. Blood on his knuckles, dirt on his face, a scar along his jaw that looked half-healed and twice earned. Then something stranger happened. He knelt, placed his hand on the creature's chest, closed its eyes, murmured something into the leaves. Not a prayer, not a thank you, something older. Virella felt it in her spine. This man, this thing they called a ghost had honor. Not the kind written in law or family lineage, the kind that lives alone, in silence, in choices no one else sees. She leaned in farther. A branch creaked under her weight. He looked up, straight at her. His eyes were not surprised, just steady, sharp, golden gray and too human to ignore. She froze. He turned back to the body, stood, then walked away. No fear, no questions. Just gone. Virella stayed on the branch long after the clearing was empty, heart loud in her chest. She had come to observe, to report, to confirm that the creature in the forest was real, and now she knew he was. But more than that, she knew he was watching too. Virella came back the next day. She told herself it was for a better angle, for a closer look, for tactical advantage. But the truth sat heavy in her chest like a weight that shifted every time she breathed. She had watched him defeat a predator 3 times his size with nothing but instinct and a broken stick. She had seen him kneel over its body and close its eyes. She had seen him look up at her without fear, and now she could not stop seeing him. She returned before dawn, climbing silently through the upper canopy where the fog rolled like low clouds, thick and silver. The forest below was still, dew clinging to the undergrowth in beads of light. She found his camp by accident, or maybe because he let her. No fire, just a smoldering pit of coals, ringed with smooth stones, a lean-to built of woven branches and large waxy leaves, barely visible beneath the curve of a fallen tree. And him, Kalen, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, back straight, eyes closed, meditating, naked from the waist up, arms resting on his knees. Muscle built not from vanity, but from necessity. Every part of him said survival. Every line on his body told a story he hadn't spoken. She stayed hidden, watching. He opened his eyes, didn't look at her, but he knew. She stepped forward, slow and quiet, making no effort to startle or hide. He didn't move, didn't speak, only watched as she walked into the edge of his camp and sat down on the far side of the fire pit. Still silence, still calm. She reached into her satchel, pulled out a ration disc and laid it between them. He looked at it, then at her. Then slowly, deliberately, he took it. He ate without thanks, without question. When he was finished, he picked up a broken seed pod and offered it back. Not food, but a gesture. A trade. She accepted it. held it in her palm like something sacred, and in the quiet that followed, she found herself speaking. "You should be claimed," she said. His eyes lifted, meeting hers. Not anger, not confusion, but interest. "You move like you were carved for something more." She swallowed. "A queen should claim you. Someone worthy." "You think a queen would survive here?" he said softly. His voice was low, rough, beautiful. If she knew how to watch, maybe. If she knew when not to command, maybe. And if she knew when to leave, would she? Varela didn't look away. Numbers, she would stay. Kalen stood, not threatening, not retreating. He walked to the edge of the clearing and knelt beside a small pool fed by a cracked stone. He cupped water in his hands, drank, then turned to her. "You talk like someone who has never hunted alone." She raised an eyebrow. "And you move like someone who forgets he's still being hunted." They sat in the silence again. No weapons drawn, no words wasted, only observation, only presence. And then she said something that surprised even her. "I'm not here to capture you." "Then why are you here?" "To understand what I saw." He studied her for a long time, then turned back to the pool. "You should go, I might." "You will, but not today. Not today." She stayed until dusk. They ate in silence, and when the stars blinked through the treetops, she said one last thing. "I wasn't wrong. You should be claimed." Then she left. And for the first time, Kalen did not vanish into the forest when someone walked away. He stayed and watched the place where she had sat, the warmth in the ground where her body had been. And he remembered. The message traveled faster than light, wrapped in a diplomatic seal of obsidian and fire. From the core world of Telkaran, across 3 systems and 7 jump gates, it reached the outpost beneath the jungle moon of Virex Prime, and the room that received it fell silent. "He has been seen," said the voice from the message. "A human male. Survived the burn zones. Rebuilt instinct. Hunted apex predators without aid. No name. No tag. No voice. Only action. He is not docile. He is not tracked. He is not controlled, which makes him valuable, which makes him dangerous." The queen has decided. Her words were law before they were ever spoken. Her advisors listened in stillness, standing beneath the vaulted ceilings of the flame court, their hands folded and their minds already working angles. This male must be acquired, not destroyed, not tamed. Acquired, for study, for selection, for pairing. His traits are desirable, his defiance even more so. The genetic registry confirmed the potential: high compatibility, adaptable neural structure, self-healing capacity, combat proficiency without augmentation. A perfect breeding candidate, a relic that should not exist and now cannot be ignored. Meanwhile, back on Virex, Varela sat on the edge of her scout ship, legs dangling over the side, staring into the fire she had built from hand-collected bark and bones. She knew what would happen next. The Empire would not leave something like Kalen to the wild. Not after what he had done. The footage had been uploaded before she could stop it. She had watched it spread. Cell phone clips, half-scrambled transmissions, even a stolen image of Kalen dragging a dead beast across a ravine with one arm while setting a trap with the other. He was myth before he was known, and now he was no longer hers to witness. He was theirs to seize, and that terrified her. Kalen felt it too. The forest had changed, not louder, not brighter, but awake. The trees whispered more often. The roots shifted quicker beneath his feet. The animals moved in different patterns, reactive, aware, like they sensed a new predator coming. He had lived in this forest for years, not just survived, merged. But now the edges no longer welcomed him like before. He didn't speak it aloud, but he knew eyes were turning toward him. Not animal, not natural. Elsewhere in orbit, a ship entered atmosphere under silent drive. Its hull glowed faintly with red lines, shaped like veins. On board were 3 elite retrieval agents, bred and trained not for diplomacy, but for acquisition. Not to kill, but to collect. They did not knock. They did not explain. They landed. Varela intercepted the data pulse 30 minutes after it fired from the fleet. It carried a single directive: locate the human, secure the asset, present him for selection at the Queen's conclave. Deadline, 5 rotations. After that, he would be taken by force. She stared at the words, then erased them from her console. She knew what the Empire would do to him. They would strip him down, test him, reprogram him, pair him with someone of high caste. They would turn the ghost into a stud. They would turn his silence into service. And they would never understand the cost, not just to him, but to the forest, to the part of her that had stayed to listen. She stood, grabbed her rifle, and walked back into the trees, not as a soldier, not as a hunter, but as something else entirely. Someone who had chosen not to conquer what she admired. Someone who had learned that claiming did not mean keeping, it meant protecting. And somewhere not far from the cave where Kaelin slept beneath a blanket of moss and breath, the leaves whispered her name. He was no longer alone. The forest was darker that night, not in light, but in presence. The air pressed differently, like it had secrets clenched tight in the roots. Creatures that normally chirped, howled, or echoed stayed silent. Even the wind seemed to listen, more than move. Varela moved faster than she should have, branch to branch, root to rock. She had memorized the terrain by now. She didn't use scanners. She didn't need to. She knew where he would be. Kaelin had routines, but they were never lazy, always changing, shifting, adapting to the forest as if it were his only ally. But one thing never changed: the way he ended his day, by the stream, just past the fallen log shaped like a serpent's jaw, where the water reflected the sky through a hole in the canopy, where the stars could be seen. That's where she found him, crouched low, washing his hands, blood-stained from a kill she hadn't witnessed. A wild bird from the look of the feathers, fresh, silent. He didn't turn as she approached, but she knew he sensed her. He always did. She stepped into the open. "Kaelin," she said. No response. She knelt beside the water's edge, close but not touching. She looked into the stream, saw both their reflections. The way his face remained unreadable, the way hers trembled ever so slightly around the mouth. She reached into her pack and pulled out an old compass. Primitive, analog, human. She placed it between them on the dirt. He looked at it, then at her. His eyes narrowed. A message. She began to draw in the earth with her finger. Simple shapes. 3 ships. A landing zone. The word for soldier in Chiari glyph. A large circle. And an X in the center. Then she wrote one word. "You." He understood immediately. She looked up. "They're coming for you. They don't see you as a man. They see you as a specimen, a gift, a problem to control." He remained still. His fingers brushed the compass. He picked it up, held it for a moment, then slid it into a pocket he had sewn himself along the inner seam of his belt. Not a thank you, but not rejection. She waited. "I am not supposed to be here," she said. "I broke orders. They'll exile me for this." He turned fully now, faced her, his expression unreadable, his silence louder than speech. She swallowed. "I did it because I chose to. Not because I was told. Not because I pity you. Not because I want something from you. But because no one warned you. And you deserve that." He studied her for a long moment, then spoke. Only one word. "Why?" She breathed slowly. "Because when you looked at me and didn't flinch, I felt more human than I ever had in the cities that raised me. Because when you let me sit in silence beside you, you showed me more respect than any lover I have ever had. Because when you closed the eyes of the beast you killed, I saw something sacred that I thought this galaxy had lost. So I warned you. Because I chose you." Kaelin stood, his shadow stretched long behind him. He held her gaze, then reached down, picked up a second stick, and carved something into the dirt beside her glyphs. A path, a safe road, through the cliffs, beneath the roots. She stared. "You trust me?" "No," he said, voice quiet. "I respect you. And that is the first step." Then he was gone, melted into the trees. The forest swallowed him. But the message remained. Not just the drawing, the choice. And Virella, for the first time in her life, no longer wanted a command. She wanted to be understood. And maybe, Just maybe, she already had been. They arrived at dawn. 3 ships, matte black and silent, slid through the atmosphere like knives through silk. No fanfare, no signal, no warning. They simply appeared, above the tree line, beyond the cliffs, hovering low in the mist as if they had always been there. Inside the lead craft, the retrieval unit waited. 6 elite operatives, augmented, trained in deep capture protocols. Their task was clear. Do not kill. Do not wound. Secure the subject. Return him to the Queen. Alive, untouched, intact. Asset designation, Kalen. Profile primitive, unarmed, isolated, threat level low. They stepped out in single formation, boots absorbing into the soil without sound. Helmets locked, thermal visors on. One flick of a finger triggered the overlay. No movement, no visible traps, just forest and forest lies. They spread out, flanking the zone Varela had once marked as safe. But Kalen was not there. Not anymore. Because Kalen didn't wait for wars to reach him. He brought the forest to them. The first operative fell silently into a pit carved between natural stone outcroppings and tree roots. Covered in live moss and leaf shroud, it registered as flat terrain until his leg broke through and snapped downward. Not fatal, but loud enough. The others heard. They tightened formation. The second tripped a line, a simple one, made from fibers stripped from local flora, braided and laid with scent bait. It triggered no explosion, just sound. A predator's call, recorded and warped. The jungle answered it, not with hunger, but with silence. The kind that comes right before something ancient remembers how to wake up. Kalen moved between trees like a shadow that forgot how to be caught. He didn't need to strike them down. He needed them to leave. And nothing sends soldiers running faster than fear of what they cannot predict. One by one, he let them glimpse him. A flicker behind a branch, a breath across the back of a neck, a reflection in the water that should not have moved. Then he disappeared again. He wanted them on edge. He wanted them questioning the mission, because a soldier who doubts is already losing. The unit leader tapped her comms. "We are being observed. Do not engage," said the voice from the ship. "You have tranquilizers. Use them." "He is unarmed." She looked around. No tracks. No footprints, no sound. "We are not observing a man," she said into the mic. "We are chasing a ghost." At the edge of the field, beneath the remains of a broken satellite dish, long reclaimed by vines, Kalen waited. He stood in the open, unmoving. The last operative spotted him, raised his weapon, did not fire. Kalen stared back, unblinking, unthreatened, a presence that asked one question without speaking. "Do you really believe you can take me?" The operative hesitated, and then dropped the rifle, backed away, retreated. The comms flared in static. "Abort mission. Repeat. Abort." He's not a capture. He's a warning. That night, Kalen returned to the stream. Varela waited for him there. "I saw them flee," she said. He sat beside her. "They'll send others." "Yes." She leaned back, letting her head tilt toward the stars. But now they know. He's not for sale, not for study, not for show. She looked at him. They came to take a beast, but they met a man who became myth. He said nothing, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, and that was enough. The night after the soldiers fled, the forest breathed easier. The air moved like it remembered how to carry peace. The creatures returned one by one, small birds nesting in the crooks of trees, 4-legged shadow cats threading between roots. Even the water seemed calmer, like the stream had held its breath and finally let go. Varela waited by the fire. She hadn't lit it. Kalen had. It surprised her. This gesture, this small invitation. A flame built not for warmth, not for cooking, but for presence. He sat across from her, still silent, still steady. But something had shifted. He watched her with a different kind of attention now. Not guarded, not curious. Something in between. Something like permission. The silence stretched long between them, and she did not break it. She let it settle, let it become its own language. And then, without warning, he spoke. Not loudly, Just clearly. Enough. She looked up, startled. The firelight caught on his face, on the lines worn there by time and wilderness. His eyes did not waver. He had said only one word, but it was enough to silence the world around them. She sat forward slowly. Enough what? Enough being hunted. Enough being called a thing. Enough being silent when I know how to speak. Her voice was soft. You have always known? Yes. Then why wait? Because words are not currency. Not out here. She nodded slowly. And now? Now I know you won't spend them for me. She felt something twist in her chest. Not pain. Recognition. He wasn't giving her words to win her. He was giving them because she had stayed long enough to earn them. She folded her hands in her lap. I never asked for your story, he nodded, because you knew I would tell it if I wanted to. Exactly. He looked into the fire. There was a girl once, he said. Before the war, she was loud, loved stars, thought everything could be fixed if you loved it hard enough. She died, she left, and I let her, because I thought I would only hurt her if I stayed. He paused and then said, that was my first silence. She leaned in closer. And the others? I stopped speaking when I stopped recognizing the people around me. You didn't stop knowing who you were. Number only stopped trying to explain it to those who didn't listen. She let the quiet settle again, and then said, I listened. Yes, and you're still here. She reached across the fire and laid her hand on the ground between them. Not a request, a presence. He placed his hand beside hers, not touching, not crossing, but close. You never asked me what I wanted, he said. She looked at him. What do you want? He turned his eyes to her. Not to be owned, not to be admired, to be understood. Her voice trembled. Then you already are. They sat together long into the night, not lovers, not leaders. Just two people in a forest, building a language out of silences and truths. And in the distance, beneath the leaves, the roots of something ancient began to stir. Not war, not rebellion, but connection. The message came in a silver cylinder, hand-delivered by a diplomatic envoy with no rank, no weapons, and no expression. He handed it to Varela, bowed, and left without a word. The forest watched him go, uneasy. So did she. Kalen sat at the edge of the cliff when she brought it to him. He did not look at the device. He looked at her. What does it say? He asked. She hesitated. It says you're invited. To what? To choose. She knelt beside him. The Queen requests you come to the conclave. They've seen you. They've seen what you did. They want to recognize it. Officially. He said nothing. She continued. They're offering you a mate of your choosing, from the noble caste. Anyone. Why? Because they fear what they couldn't catch, and now they want to claim you by invitation. He was quiet. She watched his face for any trace of emotion. There was none. Only thought. They never saw me, he said. Only what I could give them. Genes, story, control, but never self. They want to put a crown on you, she said. Maybe so they can decide how to wear you. He finally turned to her. Do you think I should go? Number why? Because you're not theirs to invite. You're yours to decide. He stood, took the silver message cylinder and carried it into the clearing. He didn't crush it. He didn't destroy it. He opened it, removed the thin scroll inside, unrolled it, stared at the seal, then turned to a fallen branch, pulled a knife from his belt, and began to carve. Slow, patient, precise. When he finished, he placed the carved wood on the message scroll and held them both out to Varela. She looked down. The carving was simple. 2 lines standing side by side. Equal, parallel. No chains, no crown, just presence. And the scroll, still intact, still bearing the royal seal. But now it carried something else. A mark they would not understand. Not at first. But one day, maybe. What do you want me to do with it? She asked. Send it. Without signature? Yes, but let them know. Know what? That I did not run. That I did not kneel. That I am not a breeder. I am a man. And I already chose where I stand. She nodded. And for the first time she smiled, not because she understood him, but because she knew he had understood himself. That night she lay beside him under the canopy, stars above, silence between, and the forest resting with them. "You could have had a throne," she said. He reached for her hand. "Why would I need a throne when I already have a place beside someone who listens?" The forest changed over time, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, like the way a breath fills the lungs after you have learned to stop holding it. Roots grew deeper, water ran cleaner, and in one small clearing at the edge of the canyon, something new had taken shape. A home, not large, not proud, just alive. Walls built from stone and patience. Roof made from woven leaves and sun-baked clay. Smoke from the chimney rose like a quiet promise every morning, not as a signal, as a rhythm. Inside, Varela stirred the morning brew. The scent of crushed seed pods and mountain root filled the air. It was the kind of smell that did not demand attention, only comfort. Outside, Kalen was carving again. Not weapons, toys, small, smooth shapes shaped from old wood. One looked like a fox, another like a sun. The third, unfinished, had wings but no body yet. He held it in one hand, testing the weight. Then came the sound. Not the wind, not the fire. Laughter. Their daughter. She ran through the clearing barefoot, hair loose, face streaked with dust and joy. She leapt into Kalen's arms without hesitation, without fear. He caught her and spun once. Slow, careful, strong. Varela stepped outside, watched them for a long moment. "You spoil her," she said. Kalen looked up. "I teach her the world is not always trying to take. And if it does," Varela said, "then she will know how to stand." Together they returned inside. A table built from stone and ironwood sat at the center of their home. They gathered around it, not to feast, but to share. Bread, stories, time. Later their daughter curled up in the reading nook, tracing the curves of an old map Kalen had drawn by hand. A map of their land, not as it was, as it had become. A place where no one ruled, but everything grew. Varela watched her sleep. "She is not a soldier," she said. Kalen nodded. "She is not a weapon. She is not a legacy either. She is a beginning." "And beginnings," Varela whispered, "do not ask to lead. They ask to be walked beside." He rested his head against hers. "Then we will walk. Together." The moon rose high that night, and for the first time in many years, no one came. No envoys. No drones. No soldiers. Just stars. And peace. And breath. And if you are still listening, if you followed Kalen's silence and Varela's choice all the way to the end, then maybe this story whispered something to you too. Not about power, not about winning, but about standing still long enough to be seen. So we ask, have you ever stood beside someone? Not because they needed you, but because you chose to. Would you give up the crown just to sit in the same silence with someone who mattered? Tell us, drop your truth in the comments. Because out here in the stars, the strongest people are not those who conquer, but those who choose to stay. HFY Obsession will be here for every story that dares to love gently and stand without chains.